you receive your Gymarx, tucked just inside the row are the instructions for that particular job. These instructions include a proof which shows all the graphics positioned on the floor, instructions which show masking and painted areas for each mask, and also a reminder sheet that asks you to look over the masking before you apply it to the floor to make sure that everything is accurate. Start by unrolling the masking. Each panel will be identified with a red label. What we generally do is cut between each red label, stack the panels accordingly to the mask, and set them aside. Here are the red labels we are speaking of. This one is marked Mask 2, Panel 3. And here are the overlap decals. The yellow masking must be overlapped 1/2 inch or the lines will not line up. The overlap decal that you just saw is 1/2 inch tall, so you can use these instead of measuring. Here they're simply cutting apart each panel, getting them in order. These panels are from Mask 2. Since Mask 2 will be used later, we're simply going to put these in a pile and set them aside. Now we're starting with the panels for Mask 1. The way we identify the panels generally start at the bottom would be panel 1. The one above it would be labeled panel 2, and the one above that would be labeled panel 3. All of these 3 panels make up Mask 1. And we'll start by taping all 3 panels together using the overlap stickers to overlap yellow masking to yellow masking. Do not overlap the paper. It must be the yellow masking overlapped. Then we're going to tape all 3 panels together so that we have just one big design. And try to assure that Mask 1 is fairly accurate. If not, you might have trouble with Mask 2 lining up properly. Now once you have the great big design, all 3 panels taped together, the outside edge, outside circle of that masking lines up with the 12-foot circle that is taped on the floor. There's also a center line which keeps it centered on the court, so there's almost no measuring involved here. Simply line up the straight line of the center court line and the outside circle, and that will give your positioning on the floor. And if it does not match up with your outside circle exactly, just split the difference. Here you're shown lining the outside circle with the taped circle on the floor. Then you'd want to tape all 3 panels to the floor in position. Now we're going to simply remove the tape off the first panel and just kind of fold it out of the way. It's still taped onto the floor, so it's still in position. Same with panel 3. Shown here cutting the masking tape that tapes the panel to the floor. This is a good idea because you can bring the masking back down to the tape after you remove the liner, and this kind of helps you keep it in position, keep it from moving. Now we're going to apply a vertical hinge with some masking tape. Run a couple pieces of 3/4 or some 2-inch masking tape close to the center of the panel. This way it cuts the material in half, so you're only dealing with half of it at a time instead of that one long length. Makes it easier to handle and less likely to get out of position when you put it back to the floor. Bring up 1/2 of the masking up to the vinyl hinge or the tape hinge. Remove the liner. This exposes the adhesive part of the masking. And when you get back to the tape hinge, just take a pair of scissors and cut the liner. Get it out of the way. 2-man technique here for bringing the masking back to the starting position. And once again, try to line it back up with the masking tape. And if you can, leave it a little bit off of the floor. Have one man hold it on one end. The other man can start with a J-roller or a squeegee from the hinge and work outwards towards the one holding the masking. Try not to skip as you're rolling or squeegeeing. This may cause a bubble, which the bubbles aren't that critical with masking as long as they're not on the cut line where we're going to try to create a sharp edge with our paint. If you have a bubble right there on the edge, try to work it out. Then remove the vertical hinge. Bring the other half back. Remove that liner. Place it back in its original position. And here we're showing applying it with the squeegee, which are provided with each job. You will get a squeegee with each masking. And then remove the transfer tape. This will expose the masking and then all the open areas of the masking which you'll be painting. Try to remove this as sharp as possible, sharp angle, low to the floor. And be careful if it's sticking on the blue tape. Sometimes it doesn't stick well to that. Just be careful that it doesn't come off of the floor. And if it does, just roll it back down and remove the transfer tape again. Panel 2 is then folded back into position. Check it again, make sure it hasn't moved. Make sure it's lining up with the cut areas of panel 1. And just like panel 1, we're going to apply another vertical hinge to the center of this panel. Again, remove the liner up to the hinge. Cut it at the hinge. And this is a technique for one man. One man can handle this. Of course, it's easier with two. But if one man had to do this job himself, we would just take the liner that we cut off, place it back down on the floor under the panel, and just let about a foot of it be exposed. Squeegee a foot of it, move the wax liner back another foot, squeegee another 1 foot, and so on till you get to the end. Then remove the vertical hinge. And do the same for that half. Remove the transfer tape. And then do the same for panel 3. since we're going to paint the background circle the same time we were doing the eagle, we're just going to tape off that outside circle line just to make it easier to control the brush and roller when we go to do our painting. And with a multiple panel job, there is some trimming required where the three panels meet. It's usually very slight. But check all these areas where the panels come together also before you start painting. On the first mask it isn't that critical, because usually the second mask will cover it. But be very careful on mask 2. This will be your final, and you really want it clean and sharp. Showing some slight trimming right there where the panels come together. And now we're ready to paint. Very important to try to get a good covering paint, because if it covers well you can put less on, so you don't have that high buildup which causes some drying problems. And we usually try to start towards the center of the design and work out. We'll usually use a roller to apply it and then have a brush follow right behind the roller just to smooth it out. None of these colors touch. You always have masking between each color. But be a little careful. You don't want to run wet paint into wet paint. good example. The yellow next to the white. Just go slow so you're not bringing any wet paint into your wet white. Now they're painting the inside of the 12-foot circle. This can be on the same day, so you save yourself a day's labor here. You do it at the same time you're doing the graphics. Then we remove the masking. Be sure to leave the geometric shapes on the floor, and they are labeled to remind you to do that, because mask 2 will start by lining up with these geometric shapes so that it is positioned correctly over mask 1. This masking was taken off the next day. We typically like to take it off the same day that we paint, but with all that paint in the middle there, it was difficult to do on this design. Now we've got scuff pads hitting the edges of that paint. Actually scuff the whole area, particularly the edges, because if you don't and you put mask 2 over it, if those sharp edges are still there, if there's any scuffing after mask 2 has been painted, the colors want to come through pretty easily. And we like to take one color, stay on one color, scuff with the same pad. Don't use the same pad in different colors because it'll stain. Vacuum everything real well. And then we damp mop it. Then mask 2 starts. Right now they're lining it up with the geometric shapes. That's your starting point. Check it throughout the design and see how it's lining up on the painted areas from mask 1. Don't use the geometric shapes as the sole way to line it up. It is a good starting point though. We'll also lay panel 2 and panel 3 in position before you stick anything. Make sure everything's working before you apply it. Everything's in position. And make sure you checked so that the cuts from panel 1 to panel 2 line up. This is actually more critical than the geometric shapes. They're just kind of a starting point. if you notice the red labels on the geometric shapes from mask 1, just remind you to leave them on the floor. Do not remove them when you remove all the masks from mask 1. After they're all in a position, we'll tape them to the floor. Do the same as we did mask 1, just hinge them back out of the way. And we're going to start with panel 1 again with the vertical hinge. Move the liner. Come back to the geometric shapes. Remove the hinge. Remove the transfer tape. Same with panel 2. And with panel 3. This shows the 1/4 inch spread on the colors from mask 1. These colors are spread a 1/4 inch so that if mask 2 is misaligned slightly, it still won't cause any gaps in the paint and show any wood below it that isn't supposed to be there. And we're ready for paint. Make sure you trim these very carefully where the panels meet, because this last mask is critical on that. Trim them up nice and neat. And we'll remove the masking. And we'll follow up painting the 12-foot circle line. And peel the tape. And this one we also left a 1/4 inch void for the half-court line. If you look carefully, you can see it's kind of hard to spot. We'll zoom in on it in a minute. And this shows the completed job. There you can see the 1/4 inch void.